It's not uncommon to find things like Sunseeker yachts on the balance sheet, which can be quite hard to explain to a buyer. When individuals run businesses, they quite often see the company as their own and instead of a separate entity.
We're talking to Alex Zachary, the corporate and commercial partner from BP Collins Solicitors. Is it a long process? How long does it generally take? And also, how much does it cost?
Well, it kind of depends on the size and complexity of the transaction and how many issues have to be resolved. It typically takes anywhere between 6 and 10 weeks, start to finish. In terms of the cost, it will depend again on the size and complexity of the transaction. Your lawyers are usually prepared to come up with a flexible fee structure. Might be a capped fee or a fixed fee or a modular fee or even just normal hourly rates. Your corporate financier or sales broker will probably want a retainer up front and then a success fee calculated as a percentage of the sales price.
And if you find a buyer, can you carry on as a seller running your business in the way you've always done, or are you restricted?
Well, unless you've signed an agreement with the buyer that says otherwise, yes, you can, but you should be careful about the decisions that you make. For example, if you commit your business to long-term commitments, that might make the business more unattractive to a buyer who has a different strategy. Maybe always speak to your advisory team before you enter into any commitments of that type, just to make sure you're doing the right thing.
What happens with the existing staff? Are their employment rights protected for the time being?
Well, it depends on the structure of the deal. If you're selling the shares in a company, they'll just carry on being employed by that company. If you're selling the business and assets, they may very well transfer to the buyer automatically under legal rules relating to the business, relating to business transfers. It's not uncommon, however, for buyers to want to make synergies and cost savings after a transaction. So if the continuity of your employee's employment is important to you, you might want to try and find out what the buyer's strategy is.
So you've found a buyer and you've agreed a price. What happens next?
Well, you might want to look into your buyer in a bit more detail. You'd principally be concerned to ensure that they've got the finance in place to make the purchase. If any part of the price is going to be deferred, you'll certainly want to check the buyer's creditworthiness.
If you have a preferred buyer, is there a scenario where you can give them a sort of an exclusive negotiating period?
Yes, sometimes that can be a good idea. It helps you to focus on one buyer. You should be careful before you grant a buyer a period of exclusivity, of course. Make sure you've agreed all the key commercial terms to ensure that they are in fact your preferred buyer. You might also want to consider asking the buyer for a financial commitment before you give them exclusivity.
And how long would that exclusivity period last, generally speaking?
Anywhere between a month and 3 months, I guess. Again, it will depend on the complexity of the transaction, how long is reasonable in the circumstances.
And what other legal obligations can you think of that the seller is bound to tell a potential buyer?
Well, quite often a buyer will want you to commit not to compete with the business you've sold for a matter of months or years afterwards. There might also be other agreements a buyer would look for from you. For example, if you own the business premises from which the business is trading, they might want to tie up a lease. If you have another business that supplies goods or services to the business and it relies on those goods and services, they might very well want you to enter into a formal supply contract moving forwards. Equally, if you own intellectual property rights the business needs to use, they might want a license. And those kind of things can enhance the value of your business if you put them in place.